Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we're taking a very fun trip. We are going to Colorado, which is where I grew up. However, we are venturing outside of the area I grew up and we are doing a road trip around the southwest part of Colorado. Super excited to take you along. I was so excited for this trip. We typically as a family have always done our local trips to Steamboat Springs, and Steamboat Springs is really great. I really love it. This year, due to, various things happening in the economy, my family couldn't quite swing Portugal. So instead we decided to stay a little closer to home, and I suggested going on a road trip to the southwest parts of Colorado that while I had physically been to, I had never cognitively been to because we did this trip when I was around 1 year old. My parents are always like, you've been there. And I'm like, not that I can remember. So that's basically what we're doing in this vlog. Hopefully you enjoy. We see a lot of beautiful, beautiful parts of America, and I had a ton of fun. So let's hop into the footage. All right, it is day one of this trip. We are driving out to the mountains. I arrived in Denver 3 days before we left for the mountains because I wanted to give my body time to adjust the altitude. If you don't know how you react to altitude, I know I tend to get a little bit sick because I'm anemic. I do recommend going to Denver first and acclimating there for a few days before going up into the mountains, just because you can get kind of sick and it's not a very good time. But what is a very good time is the drive. It's always so gorgeous driving anywhere really in Western Colorado. I'm really excited and have been looking forward to this trip a ton. We're just driving away. Honestly, this trip's going to be a lot of driving because that is how road trips work. I am mostly a podcast person on long drives like this, so I queued up a podcast. It's pretty old, called Patient Zero. It's actually very, very eerie to listen to because it came out before the COVID pandemic, and it's a very strange listen because it feels very foreshadowy. It was also a great podcast. So yeah, that was our choice for the way out, and I feel like we talked about Lyme disease the rest of the trip, so maybe it was not the choice for our vacation, but very, very informative podcast. And we stopped in Walsenburg for lunch before continuing our drive to the Great Sand Dunes. And then we arrived at the Great Sand Dunes. You can see them here in the distance as we drive to the park. I was here last when I was about 1 or 2 years old, so it has been a while. This was just a really fun trip to kind of retrace steps that I had been when I was like not a cognizant person. But once we arrived, we parked and we are now walking to the dunes. We aren't quite sure what exactly our plan is for how far we plan to go up. You can hike kind of pretty much freely in the dunes. You can go up as high as you want. There's no real set paths. Any sand dunes, these shift. I will say walking here is rather difficult. I have on my hiking boots. Even though it's sandy, that just still felt like the best decision. You can really kind of see the scale as you see like the people. It takes a while of walking just to even get out to where the dunes start to really go up. And we did end up climbing some of the ridges. We had different desires as a group on how far we went. It is also a fun part of traveling as an adult is you don't have to stick to everybody's decisions. Everybody can kind of make some of their own choices. So I definitely wanted to achieve some heights. So we're headed up this ridge here, but again, showing you the scale with all the different people. You can see all these tiny people kind of all sorts of places. And here, it's hard to tell, but it's actually quite windy, so we definitely have sand whipping our legs. We had a few like really big gusts come through here. You can definitely see how these shift and how they kind of build up and all of that. And here I have climbed a lot further. If you see kind of a cluster of people down there, that's where a lot of my family is. Me and my dad wanted to go up further. I don't know if I'll ever be back, or I don't know if I'll be able to be this active. So I wanted to take the opportunity. And here we are all walking back, being kind of goofy. Definitely a bit of a workout here. And then I also wanted to show you, this is some people going down on boards. You can kind of like snowboard the dunes. Looks really fun, but really tiring because you have to walk back up with your board if you want to go again. But that was the dunes. That was kind of our side stop on the way to Durango, which is where we're going to actually be staying for a few nights. It was a fun time and a good stop. We did have to go about an hour out of the way to be able to do this, but I think it was well well worth it. Our national parks are so beautiful and so special. I just feel very special about Colorado in general. So I was more than happy to do the detour here. And from here, it's just going to be a whole lot of driving and enjoying all the changing landscapes of Colorado. Colorado has great diversity in landscape. I can never complain about a drive, especially a drive to the southwest corner, which in my opinion is one of the very beautiful parts of Colorado. You go through these kind of like valleys with farmland and pastures, and then through these passes with kind of giant mountains and just lots of really, really interesting rock formations and natural beauty. And I always appreciate the sunshine in Colorado. I actually moved to Seattle because I thought I didn't like sunshine that much. I was maybe wrong. We are just going to continue to drive and get into our house. We don't make it till after dark, unfortunately, but we do make it. So that's all that matters. And in the morning, we had a lovely visit by this buck. This house was absolutely fantastic. It was, I think, 15 or 20 minutes out of Durango, like the main city, but we got to enjoy wildlife and just have a great time. And honestly, this was more of a like cooking at home type of trip and less of a going out all the time trip because we're here to enjoy nature and our family and each other. I find seeing wildlife like this so special. And from here, we are continuing our drive to Mesa Verde National Park, which is about, I think, 40 or 50 minutes from where we stayed. Again, lots of really, really beautiful things to see on the way there, beautiful drives. And here we have made it to the park. We've entered. We're already kind of driving up along the top of some of the mesas. And it is just so, so, so stunning here. I will note you're going to see autumnal colors here, which you're seeing this video all the way in October. So you're probably not too concerned. I shot this in September, very, very early for kind of the amount of fall colors you're seeing. And we found out from the park rangers it is due to a pretty big drought that's going on right now. And this is a burn from a long time ago, but here we are actually driving through burned forest. When you travel in Colorado, you just kind of get used to seeing large swaths of burned landscape from either a long time ago or fairly recently. It's part of nature, but it's also part of poor land stewardship, and it's really sad because wildfires naturally happen, but just not at the intensity that now happens because of lots of different reasons. But we do arrive, and we are going to take a tour actually through the Cliff Palace, which is what you're seeing here. This is a tour I've dreamt of doing, gosh, probably since I was like 18. Again, my parents will always remind me I've been here before, but not when I understood what I was seeing. I don't know how to describe this place, but this is definitely one of the coolest places I've ever been in my life. There was something about this place that felt really special. I love just learning about all the different ways indigenous societies lived in the land, and we learned a lot from this guide, and they also talked quite a bit in this tour. It's really interesting because when I go back to my scrapbooks that my mom made, she references what happened to the people who lived here, which actually has now been debunked, and the tour guide actually talked about that and acknowledged that, and I hope that's not something that's going to be a narrative that gets lost as a result of the current Republican administration's policies. It's so important to learn accurate information on the people who lived here, and the people who lived here have descendants that still spend time in this place, and we can learn so much about their ancestors from their descendants, and it's really important that we include these people when we talk about these really special places. I have to say, again, this is just truly one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. I just think about all the work this took. The tour guide talked about it too, about how this is a thriving society because they're building buildings that are not just places to dwell, but actually like aesthetic. You see aesthetic pottery and arts and weaving. Very, very, very small city, but it's like a fully functioning society that has time and resources to create art. And all of these buildings were built by the ancestral Puebloans. It is also a World Heritage Cultural Site. The region that we're in contains about 5,000 archaeological archaeological sites, including 600 cliff dwellings, which is just wild. Whenever you think about how old these are, which the Cliff Palace is estimated to be between 800 and 1,000 years old. The other thing is they did leave this because this space no longer served them, and I also think about how much I feel like we don't leave things that no longer serve us. And they do talk about how like it took a generation or two to actually move from here to better spots. You know, you wouldn't move your older parents necessarily from it. It was really interesting, and there are plenty of resources online if you want to learn more about this site. Highly recommend. And if you go on this tour, please, please, please be really respectful of where they tell you you can and cannot go. I do want to include the walk out of here, which I also thought was really cool. This is a similar path that they would have also taken. I don't know, just stepping in the shoes of people who lived so long ago is always really cool to me, but I also do want to note it from a ability level perspective. When I talk about altitude, this is why I talk about spending some time in Denver to adjust, is this can be quite hard on your body. But yeah, it was really cool, and I highly recommend. They have 2 other tours, I believe. They do sell out during the busy seasons, and then the other tours that they offer are smaller of other dwellings. I will say the other 2 tours that you can do are on very much my list of hopefully something I get to do someday. But yes, definitely recommend doing at least 1 tour when you're here in this park, but you will have to plan ahead. After this, we drove around and did a couple of the loops, and we stepped out to see some archaeological dwellings that are actually on top of the cliffs. You really can mostly see kind of the foundation. They aren't as intact as, of course, the Cliff Palace is. But this was also really cool. You can see very similar builds to what you saw on the Cliff Palace. You will not really be able to see them here, but I am pointing to some cliff dwellings across the way. There are tons of cliff dwellings in this mesa, but I did want to say, like, it's not just the Cliff Palace. There's a whole really, really cool combo of dwellings here. And here you can see another set of dwellings, again, not as intact. But I think what's so cool here is as you drive around this mesa, you can see multiple cliff dwellings, and you can see that the cliff dwellings could see each other from them. And I think there's just something really cool about the idea of these societies like being able to look across the cliffs and see other places that people live, and of course know those people and have that intermixing of community, and also like that sense of like a greater community from looking for out your doorstep. Last one here, this is actually the one that there are pictures of me as a baby around, because this was their most accessible cliff dwelling. Spruce Tree House has actually been closed since 2015 due to rock falls, and they don't feel it is safe to open it. You can see it outside of the museum that's in the park, which the museum's really cool. I definitely recommend you check it out. I'm hoping they were working on new exhibits that really center more Indigenous voices, and I really, really hope that they don't run out of budget again as a result of the Republican administration getting rid of DEI. And I think it is absolutely ridiculous, because it makes total sense for Indigenous people to be centered in a narrative and museum about their ancestors. After getting out at the museum and looking at the overlook over Spruce Tree House, we are now headed out of the park, and we are going to head towards the Four Corners. And we did stop for lunch in Cortez, and from there we headed on to the Four Corners. And here we have arrived at the Four Corners. We're in the parking lot here. You go kind of into the middle. There's all these buildings, but then you go in, it's this like paved, honestly really, really hot, like so dry and hot. It feels like an oven. And you go towards the Four Corners, which are marked out here. The Four Corners are where New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah all meet. It's the only point in the US where 4 corners of a state meet. We read a bit about how they decided this was the Four Corners. We were here on a not very full day, so there are vendors that are in the circle around this that are Indigenous vendors, and we were here on a weird day at a weird season to be visiting, but there are places to get fry bread here, which is a prominent Indigenous dish in the region. And this is a part of the Navajo tribal parks, so you get to support the Navajo tribe when you go. And then after the Four Corners, we are driving. Again, I just wanted to show the landscape and how wildly different this is from even the mesas, which were more green. And then of course the mountains that we came from in Durango. It's just wild how quickly the landscape changes here. But yeah, we're gonna drive all the way back to Durango now. And when we got home, we saw this little family of wild turkeys, which was very exciting. I feel like I have not seen many wild turkeys in my lifetime, but after this trip, I've seen a lot. Well, we woke up this morning to a fairly large flock of wild turkeys. And today we have slightly less plans and less busyness than the other days. We're just planning on doing a hike. So we went to Raiders Ridge Lookout via Skyline Trail. My sister, who was leading, did get us turned around a little bit. So as a result, we ended up hiking an additional mile, which is fine. There is also quite a bit of elevation gain. I think this hike is a moderate hike. It's definitely not the most challenging one I've ever been on, but it is still definitely a challenging hike. And it is very, very sunny and hot, so we are sweating. As you can see, this is a pretty brushy trail when you start on it, so there is not much shade coverage here. But there are lots of great lookouts to see as you go, so even if you didn't make it to the top, I think it would still be very enjoyable. And I have experimentally started to hike in dresses, like what I wear in my day-to-day. I, in general, don't really love athletic clothes that much, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, honestly, I basically just wear athletic clothes under a dress anyway, because I wear like a biker short. I was like, oh, I want to try hiking in a dress. Honestly, it was great. My backpack did make it, I guess, right up a little bit in the back. But other than that, I thought it was pretty darn good. I don't know if hiking clothing has never resonated with you. I do recommend a dress with some buts. Definitely not if you're doing a really hard or a really long hike, or just anything, not that you like can guarantee you won't have an emergency on a hike like this, but this is like a very well used trail. I definitely would have heavier duty outdoor gear if I was a little bit more in the backwoods on less popular trails. But for something like this, I thought a dress was great. But we're just switchbacking away here. But we have finally made it to the top of this ridge. But once you got to the top, the views were absolutely worth it and definitely beautiful. Also, one of the wildest things I thought about this trail is even this high up, we would see people who are walking this trail with like no water bottle, no whatever. They were just like running it. And I guess if that's your lifestyle and you're up here, you do that. But I always think it's wild to go into anything like this without water. But I'm a city slicker, so what do I know? I also really loved the rock formations here, and we also got to see a lot of like cool bird maneuvering because you're kind of on straight line with a lot of where like the hawks and the eagles cruise around looking for food down below, and it's always cool to see just how effortless they glide. But after sitting up there for a bit, eating a snack, we had a nice chat with a guy who was visiting from Texas. We are now redescending. As you can see, once you get up to the top of the hike, there is a lot more wooded area and shade. So there is hope for shade. It's just that beginning part that is very, very short brush and very, very hot. Something I learned from TikTok that I use this hike is when your hands start to get like that weird swelling and tingling feeling when you're going down a mountain, if you put them above your head, it helps, and it does help. I was surprised by this. My family thought I was being silly, but sometimes I deal with pretty intense hand pain after hikes because of this, so having something that helped was great. And see if you can spot the lizard here. Again, I always love seeing wildlife. But after this, back in the brush, almost to the bottom of the trail again. This took us about 3 hours, but we definitely took longer than I would say average. And we put on that extra mile by accident. And you can actually see where we were from the parking lot. If you see that ridge with the rocks on it, that's how we hiked up to. So pretty neat. After our hike, we arrived back at the house to rest. They had this kind of pond here, which was definitely a place a lot of animals came for a drink of water. And this is a mama deer, and actually she also has some baby deers around. And she was drinking and napping and just spending some time back here. And I was spending some time on the couch reading a book and just enjoying the wildlife that passed through, which included these wild turkeys. But if you look closely at one wild turkey there, it's a peacock. So I don't know how that works, but there was one singular female peacock with this group of wild turkeys. And I did a bit of research, and it seems like it's actually quite common for these flocks of peacocks or wild turkeys to like adopt each other, which was just really interesting. And we decided this was our big night out, so we headed into Durango, where we did stop in some local shops while we waited for our reservation. I really liked this wall of clocks. I thought it was very fun. Also, I will note in Durango, there's a really cool vintage shop that they had technology issues, so I didn't get to go to, but if you love vintage clothing, it is an absolutely must stop shop from what I've heard. And a reminder that I do have places that I mentioned pinned on a map. Here I am in a bookstore in Durango. I picked up a couple books here actually, but I thought this was one of the coolest bookstores I've been in. But I loved how this was organized. I loved how it highlighted things. The staff was great. They had a good selection. It was a really enjoyable shop, so I definitely recommend checking it out again if you're in Durango. And we had dinner and drinks at a place called El Moro. It was delicious. I wish I lived near this place. They had so many great cocktails. I had a peach cocktail that actually reminded me of a soup my mom used to make for dinner in my childhood. But as you can see, we all have some different drinks here. And overall, I thought the atmosphere of this restaurant was great. So also would highly recommend. They had like old films playing on the walls. They used cheese graters as their wall sconces. Just a great place. And that's it for this evening. It is our last morning at the house, and there is nary a wild turkey to be found, but that's okay. I enjoyed this place a lot, as I mentioned. But after this, we left and we began our drive to Palisades, which is where our second place is. Palisades is a pretty famous agricultural area in Colorado, and we're gonna head up there through the Telluride area, which I'm excited about. The book that I bought at the bookshop actually features somebody who lived in Telluride during its early mining town days, so super excited to see the town. And it is absolutely gorgeous out here. I have not been to Telluride again, I think since I was like 1 year old. Lots of time in the car though. I will say this is not a road trip for the road light people, which I guess road trips are not for those people anyway. This drive was just really gorgeous. I will say I did wake up this morning and I had a migraine, so I had to lay down while my family packed the car, and I just felt really bad, but I was able to with medication and colds, and I had a good setup in the car. I was able to get my migraine under control, which I'm really thankful for, because I would have been really sad to have had to like miss seeing all of this beautiful landscape that was out here. And we got out for, actually we were going to do a little side of the road pee stop on this overlook, but then 3 cars pulled in behind us, so we decided not to, and we just enjoyed the view and held our very full bladders until we reached a gas station near Telluride. But here we've made it to Telluride. As you can see, very classic Colorado mountain town. Most mountain towns in Colorado feel vaguely the same, although you can tell which ones have money and you can definitely tell which ones don't. Telluride it's like kind of akin to Aspen, I would say. A lot of people are more familiar with Aspen, but I would say Telluride is kind of on that level of ritziness. We ate really great pizza. We walked around quite a bit, and then I always enjoy seeing, they do have historic homes here and like fairly old pretty houses, which you can kind of see some here. I would actually probably at some point like to go out and stay in Telluride for a little bit more of an extended time. And after leaving Telluride, we're headed to another national park. We are headed to Black Canyon of the Gunnison, which is a really cool national park that is not like the most well known. The Black Canyon of the Gunnison is called Colorado's Grand Canyon. It is a really steep, narrow canyon though, unlike the Grand Canyon, which is fairly wide. I've been to this again when I was a baby. It is called the Black Canyon because the stone is black. I mean, it could be argued it's gray, but it is considered a black stone. So we got to learn in the visitor center all about the unique geology that made up this canyon. This canyon is wild. This is one that I don't think picks up in the footage at all how cool it is. But if you're already in this area of Colorado, this is a must stop. So unfortunately, there was a big fire here in July, and we actually came the week after it reopened. The scale of this is massive. So cool, and just such unique and cool formations. This is definitely the freshest forest fire I've been in my lifetime. Colorado experiences forest fires that are pretty devastating pretty regularly, but you can see here a ton of burn area. We did get to learn a little bit more about how a wildfire burns and how there's different ways it burns. Sometimes it's the whole landscape like this, or other times, which you'll see in other parts of this video, video, it like burns in almost like these quilted patches where like a part will be devastated and then the places next to it will be fine, just because of the way that sparks jump and fire is unpredictable. But it's quite sad that this happened. There's just so many parts of the wilderness of like my childhood that are now like burnt and ruined, and it's really sad. Like as I'm recording this, we're in the middle of a government shutdown, which pulls funding from these parks. Visiting national parks is one of the things that makes me feel really proud to live in this country, and the treatment of them recently has just been really devastating to me. But I'm so glad that we got to spend so much time in national parks on this trip and remind me why I care. I, on my main part of my channel and my sewing, talk a lot about consumption and how it impacts the planet, and like this was just a trip that was a good reminder of why I do that work and that education. It's to protect beautiful places like this from climate change. We then continued on down South Rim Road, basically stopping at any viewpoint that we thought looked really cool. I thought this one was particularly gorgeous. These canyons are just wild. I will say, if you are afraid of heights, this might be a bit of a tough overlooks and stuff, but I thought it was really cool. I am so glad this footage came out. I didn't know if it would, but this is the painted wall, which is one of the most famous views of the canyon. As you can see, it's this really beautiful black rock that is striped with the pink. Absolutely stunning. I can see it better in the footage than we were able to see in real life because I could barely see past the sun. It was an absolutely stunning view. And I think this is a good spot to show you how quickly it turns from normal brush to wildfire devastation. It just feels so sporadic and random, and again, I'm very familiar with wildfires, but witnessing something that just reopened a week before due to wildfires was just something else, and really, I don't think I want to say appreciation for wildfires, but like a greater understanding of why they're so devastating. And this is the view from the very end of the South Rim Road. And once we made it to the end of South Rim Road, we turned around and drove back through the park. Disclaimer or clarity, I am not the one driving, I am on the passenger side, just so you know. Don't film and drive, it's really unsafe. Again, my GoPro actually captured it, but we stopped one last time on our way out of the park, hoping for slightly better lighting. Definitely being here in the evening, the lighting wasn't as good as I think if you had maybe been here in the morning or closer to sunset, because we weren't quite to sunset yet here. But yeah, definitely look at your directions and figure out your timing. But here it looks gorgeous, so I'm glad this footage turned out. And from here, we are driving all the rest of the way to Palisade, where we are staying for the rest of our road trip. And now it is the next morning and we are headed to yet another national park, or I believe this is a national monument. I don't quite understand the difference. This is Colorado National Monument, which is again a really beautiful place when it comes to the landscape and the geology of it all. So we're gonna there's basically a big loop of a road, and we're gonna do that, stop to do some little hikes out, which we're not typically hiking longer than like a half mile due to the timing of this trip. But as you can see, it's super stunning here. And again, some just really, really interesting geology that I just feel like this trip had such diversity in the geology, and that was really fun to see. This here is our first big overlook, and you can see the road we came up on, very twisty and windy. Definitely not for the weak-stomached. And this here is the view at the visitor center. We're actually going to go out where that rock that's away from the edge is for our next stop, but I just wanted to show you the view from the visitor center. The visitor center is great. It is really educational and teaches you a lot about how this whole area was shaped. Again, I don't consider this real hiking, so I am not wearing like the most practical footwear. I love these shoes. I can wear them for miles and miles of walking, but like if we were going to be miles and miles of hiking, that would be different. It's great for city walking though. And of course I have a dress on. And here we're actually looking back towards the visitor center. Just kind of funny to see both ways and so quickly. Here you can see that most close to us rock formation here. Honestly, we had a really hard time discerning what was what. And in general, I really appreciate rocks, to be clear. I have a really hard time wrapping my mind around geology because of the millions and millions of years. It's very abstract and hard for me to understand. So somewhat, I feel like if you love geology, like this road trip is really the place for you. I also think it was a great trip for me, of course, too, but if you love geology, I have to imagine this trip must be insane. Also, just in general, be careful. Don't be the person who selfies and falls in a canyon. As you can see, you could literally walk right off these rocks if you aren't paying attention. I don't like to get particularly close to edges because the general rule is you're not supposed to get closer to an edge than like you can lay down. That way, if you trip and fall, you're good. But also, like, erosion's real. I don't know. Just, I always like want to tell people to be careful and don't do anything silly. And this was a slightly different viewpoint, but as you can see, really stunning again. These rock formations are just so pretty. They make me want to pick up watercolor again. And along our drive, we were lucky enough to see a desert bighorn sheep, which I have never seen before. I have seen bighorn sheep before, of course, because I grew up in Colorado. And we're getting to our last few stops on the park. Being 5 adults in one car and getting in and out of the middle seat gets really exhausting after a while. Yeah, we only have so many stops left. However, I did think this one was also gorgeous. And then this stop involves hearing echoes. You can yell into the canyon and your voice bounces back. I was able to get a couple shots of my dad's echo echoing back. I couldn't get mine, so I'm going to put in those recordings here.
Hey! Go Abs!
And this one here is our final stop. We are definitely getting pretty hungry, a little bit cranky, and really sick of getting in and out of the car. This will be the last stop besides the bathrooms on our way out, because it is key to know where your bathrooms are. I really enjoyed the Colorado National Monument, and I hope you did as well. But we are gonna head out and head on to Palisades for, I believe, some wine tastings later. This is our first wine tasting, which we actually went to partially because it was really close to our place, partially because they are obsessed with cats, which we love. And I also thought how they brought out the wines was really nice because you didn't have to wait to pour. And you could completely set your own board, which I loved because I don't really love a white wine, and most tastings include mostly white wines. So I was more than excited to have my own. And then as you can see, like, my sisters prefer lighter wine. My dad, I think, only did red wines. So we were able to tailor it and it was great. So definitely recommend, and they have all of their cats in the book. I met Hank the Tank, but he was ready for dinner and wanted to be inside. And this is Carlson Winery, by the way. I will have it on the map. We then went to a kind of more typical winery experience at Carboys. Here you got to see the grapes on the vine. We were here for that time in the season. I didn't want another wine tasting because I do a lot of wine tasting because my dad really loves wine, and so we do a lot of wine tastings. But I did really enjoy the atmosphere here. We have the beautiful mountains in the background and the grapes in the front. We have a rainbow, and I drank a wine slushie, which I do love a slushie. But after this, we headed back to the house to make dinner, but definitely a very full and busy day. And when we pulled in, we looked back behind us and the sunset was absolutely stunning. I think this is one thing that I miss the most about Colorado is the sunsets. The sunsets in Seattle are absolutely stunning too, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about the quality of the clouds in Colorado that is home to me. But with these beautiful painted clouds, that is the end of the day, and I will see you tomorrow. Today is another less busy day because we did so much driving the previous days, and we know we will be driving home the next day. So the main thing on our agenda was to go to an alpaca farm, which I was so excited about. I'm not gonna lie, this was my idea. I may have really convinced everybody to come with me, but alpacas are fun. And this place does alpaca walks, but they're quite cute and very docile, and I can see how you could get really into alpacas, especially if you like fibers and you're a fiber artist. But yeah, you can kind of see all my family, we each got our own alpaca to walk. Super cool experience. I am now really on the hunt for places to spend time with alpacas around Seattle because I enjoyed this so much. And here you can see us walking our alpacas. You have to be quite stern with them, but it was a good time. 100% recommend getting to spend time with alpacas. And this here is my alpaca Santa baby. He was very cute, but he was also the slowest walker, and I found the fastest way to get him to walk was to let him go in for a snack and then get him to walk while chewing. That would be, he would walk the fastest, because if he didn't have something in his mouth for snacking, he wouldn't move, which I do understand. So yes, that was what became my strategy to get him to keep up with everybody else, because he was a bit of a slowpoke. But we got very cute selfies together, and it was a ton of fun. The other really really exciting thing here is this is actually a very large alpaca fiber mill. I believe he said he processes for something like 80 farms in the country, and we got to see all the different stages of the alpaca here. It's really important to keep the alpacas separate because they have different qualities in their furs and things like that. But this area was where the final twists of the yarns were put onto the spools. And then they had this very fancy hat making machine. They said that there's only 3 of these in the country, and this is the only one that actually operates with natural fibers. Typically, these are used more with acrylic because acrylic is way cheaper, obviously, than alpaca hair. After we went through the tour and walked our alpacas, we got some alpaca feed. To me, it looks like some of the girls had been shorn. You do raise alpacas for their fur, so you can, do all the processing that you just saw. I thought this was fun. Some of them were really aggressive. Some of them were a lot more gentle. I guess it all depended on how hungry they were, but it was really fun even just to feed them. They're very, very silly little animals. If I wanted to live in a place with more space, I would be very, very tempted to get an alpaca. They also had some really interesting varieties of chickens, some of kind of like the fancier, fluffier, showier breeds, as well as roosters. And I decided to shove my GoPro in the pen and see what they would do, and they were quite funny. They were definitely curious. So here's a lot of like alpaca teeth, and this was honestly such a blast. After this, we went to the pie shop, which this is the best pie I've ever had in my life. So if you are in this area, you must stop. I think about this pie on at least a weekly basis, and I am looking for something as good in Seattle. The rest of the family wanted to lay low, but I convinced my mom to come out to the antique shops with me. Palisades is definitely more of a small town farming community, so it's a lot more antique malls and less of those kind of like fancy boutiques, which means this is exactly my speed. They had some really amazing antique malls, like actually some of the best I've been to in recent travels. Just really well organized, really beautifully set up, and the pricing was pretty decent. I did get one of these rain bonnets. I'm a sucker for a rain bonnet, what can I say? They also had what looked like a really cool pottery studio that if I lived there, I would want to be spending all my time at. And this antique mall had the craziest lucite purse collection I've ever seen. I wanted all of them, but I know I won't use them. I didn't want to figure out how to get them back in my suitcase, so I left them all, but they were gorgeous. And we then went to dinner. It was very, very good. I'm gonna have every single place that I mentioned linked in my down below, which actually it's my map of like the whole country and everywhere I've ever traveled and my recommendations there. Very, very, very enjoyable day. We did end it at, of course, a winery. We spent the last morning at our place, and I always feel very bittersweet about the endings to these trips. It was a bit cloudy and rainy on our way back, but I of course enjoyed the mountains as always. I was in my dad's car again, and we chose to listen to a podcast about some of the different outlaws that rode through all of these towns. And it was fun because I don't know why, I just don't think of people back then as like traveling around a ton. But obviously if you're an outlaw, you have to travel around a lot. It was fun to kind of hear them go on the same paths that we had just been on. Here we are in actually a old haunt with fond memories of mine. We are in the Glenwood Canyon. Driving home, but I have spent a lot of time hiking in this area. I used to do Hanging Lake quite frequently. Now Hanging Lake is a much more complicated hike to do. When I hit my teenage years, all I wanted to do was hike on the weekends, especially when I knew I was moving away from Colorado. I wanted to spend my time really enjoying Colorado. So this is a very familiar drive, and then I actually got one of my best friends from Seattle to come out and do this trip with me, and we stayed out in this area. So I have a lot of fond memories here. Overall, I just feel so lucky that I have a family that I enjoy spending this much time with. It's not like everything is perfect and we never get snippy, but ultimately at the end of the day, I have a family that makes me laugh and like I genuinely enjoy being around. And I feel really lucky as an adult to get to spend this time with my sisters and my parents, because that's like not something I ever take for granted. I don't live near any of my family, so trips like these are really special, and this one was just extra special, kind of retracing these steps. My younger sister wasn't even born when we did this trip really way back in the day. This was just really very memorable and one of my favorite trips I've done, even though it's in such a familiar place. We stopped somewhere for lunch and I didn't film, but we did stop at Georgetown and I got ice cream at my favorite ice cream shop in the nation is here in Georgetown. They do a spearmint chip that I love and is just like super nostalgic. This was something my family always did when we were in and out of the mountains, and then I continued the tradition by doing it when I was out here. I also have toured this hotel. It's a historic hotel that's been preserved. 10 out of 10 recommend. It's a must-do if you're ever in Georgetown. Even if you're in Denver, this is not that far of a drive, and I would highly recommend visiting Georgetown. They have some great museums and art and stuff too. But with that, we are headed home. Like I said, bittersweet. I'm always ready to go back to Seattle to see my cat and get back to normal life. But I thoroughly enjoyed this trip, and I hope this isn't the last time I'm ever in this part of the nation, but I'm like very much realistic that it might be, which made this again even more special for me because I love Colorado. It was where I grew up. I do miss it. I wouldn't move back at this point, but I do miss it. But that's all the footage you're gonna get from me, so we're gonna head to the outro. So we have wrapped up this footage. I hope you guys really enjoyed this road trip. I enjoyed it so much. I'm so glad we did it as an alternative. And honestly, I had just as much fun there as I would have had somewhere else. So that's always great. Definitely subscribe and stick around if you've made it this far. This is not necessarily my typical content, but I do put out usually a few travel videos each year. Otherwise, I am mostly a sewing channel. We go a little bit off brand occasionally. And then of course, give this a thumbs up and comment down below. It helps me out in the algorithm and I always really appreciate it. And I will see you next week. Bye.